We're going to lock the latecomers out. They'll have to come in the back door.
Yeah, there's these guys back here.
I'm glad to see so many of you here today. Our speaker, Bob McNamara, is going to share with us from his over 30 years experience in the news business.
40.
Over 40. Oh, it was just 30 at CBS. Is that
Just
right?
CBS.
Oh, okay. Well.
I had to work my way to that.
Oh, all right. Well, tell us whatever you want. We're a captive audience, and we're anxious to hear your stories.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be here this morning. I'm sorry my wife's not here. Maybe I'm lucky that she's not. So
No.
I don't get in any trouble. Just a little background. I grew up in southwestern Wisconsin in small farm towns. My dad was a John Deere dealer, and I went to high school there, and then I eventually went to 3 colleges, 2 of which are now defunct. First one was St. Michael's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I went there for a year.
Oh, yeah.
Then I went to school in Milton, Wisconsin. It was called Milton College. It doesn't exist anymore either. And then I was really kind of at a loss as to what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to get into broadcasting in some form or fashion, but I didn't know exactly where to go. But I ran into a kid when I was at Milton College who was from Chicago, and he said, you know, there's a school in Chicago you might want to try. It's called Columbia College. It's real small. They specialize in communication arts, and you might want to give that a try. So I applied there, and I went to Columbia College, and when I was there, I needed a job to help pay my way through school, and I met a kid at a party one night, and we were talking, and he said, you know, I could probably help you out. I work at WBBM TV, the CBS station, as a copy boy in the newsroom. And you're basically a gopher. You do all these, run-around jobs. You change the wire machines. You get coffee. You just do meaningless stuff. But it's a great education. And so I did that on the weekends for about a year, and then one of the full-time kids who was working there, he graduated from college and he left, and so I became a full-time copy boy. I was going to school from 8 in the morning until 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and then at 2 o'clock I went to BBM Channel 2 and worked in the newsroom from 2 to 11 o'clock at night. I did that 5 days a week, sometimes 6. It was a great education. I met some wonderful people who, unbeknownst to me, I would see later on as I moved up the ladder.
You can name drop.
Well, you wouldn't know who those guys are. They were, a woman in my hometown said, now, what did you do? And I said, well, I was at CBS News. I was a correspondent. Oh, so did you work in the back room or were you on camera? And most of the people that helped me were people who worked in the back room. They weren't on the air people, but I would see them as I moved up. So I graduated from college, and just before I graduated, a man who ran one of the studio cameras for the news shows at night was going to open a little FM radio station. It was his lifelong dream to have his own radio station in Michigan City, Indiana. And so he asked me, would you like to come to work for me and spin records and read the news? And I thought, yeah, sure. What are you paying? He said, well, I'll pay you $80 a week. And I said, I'll take it. So I went down to Michigan City and I spun records on this little FM station that, the broadcasting power of that station probably couldn't even reach downtown. But I didn't care. I was sitting in front of a microphone and I could read the news and I could spin records. And I did that for 4 months. And I saw an ad in a publication called Broadcasting Magazine that had want ads in there for announcers and news people and whatever in the television or radio industry. And there was an ad for a station in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, KCRG TV. I, as a kid, even though I grew up in Wisconsin, we saw Iowa television all the time, and I knew more about what was going on in Iowa than really what was going on in Wisconsin. So I had watched KCRG growing up. So I applied there and I got a job. And when you work in a station that size, and I'm talking 1966, you did everything. You did the news, you shot the film, you processed the film, you edited the film, you put it together. You did the radio news, you do weather on TV, you do the news on TV. So I was there for a year and a half, and it was just great experience. And I covered Bobby Kennedy about 2 weeks before he was assassinated. He had come to Iowa for an Iowa primary. They had an Iowa primary in those days, and he came there and campaigned, and I got an interview with him on his airplane as we flew from Davenport to Des Moines, where he had a campaign stop. The funny thing about that was that the people in my hometown could see me, and I would hear about anything that I ever did when I would go back home on occasional weekends. And the distressing part of that was nobody ever said anything about the interview that I did with Bobby Kennedy, but everybody remembered the story I did about the guy who rode around his bicycle at night after he came home from work, and he had a little shopping basket on the back of his bike, and a neighborhood duck that he had befriended, he would take the duck for a ride. That's all anybody ever talked about was the duck. Anyway, one of the people that I had met when I was a copy boy, he had become the bureau chief of CBS News in Chicago. And shortly before I left Cedar Rapids, there had been a tornado. And in those days, tornadoes were really kind of rare. It was a rare occurrence. And this one was in Charles City, Iowa. And our station had started spending money, and we had a helicopter. And we took the helicopter up to Charles City. And while we were there, a guy that I had met when we covered Bobby Kennedy was a fellow by the name of Ike Pappas. Does that name ring a bell with anybody? Ike Pappas was a CBS News correspondent.
Yeah.
Ike Pappas was there when when Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald. Anyway, Pappas came up to me and said, "You guys got the helicopter, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, could we use it for about 10 minutes? And Ike had done me a favor while we were covering Bobby Kennedy in Davenport, because he had allowed my cameraman to get in a car that was in front of Bobby Kennedy's car and get shots of him as he rode through Davenport. So I said, "Ike, I owe you one." Sure. So they used our helicopter, and when they finished, he came back to me and he said, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And I said, "Yeah. Why don't you say hello to John Lane, the bureau chief, the guy I used to work for as a copy boy, and just tell him you saw me." About 2 days later, John Lane called me and he said, "What are you doing in Cedar Rapids, Iowa?" And I said, I'm dying. I don't think I'm ever going to get out here." He said, "Let me see what I can do." He called me back about 3 days later and he said, "How would you like to go work for the world's greatest news director?" And I thought, geez, boy, New York, LA. And I said, "Where is that?" And he said, "Minneapolis." I thought, Minneapolis? That's never been on my radar. I grew up about 200 miles from there. And 3 weeks later, I was working there. And I stayed in Minneapolis for 6 years. It's where I met my wife, Jane. it was known, WCCO was known as a farm team for CBS because a lot of guys who had worked there later went on to work for CBS or they went to NBC. You may remember a guy's name by the name of Tom Pettit. He was with NBC.
Yeah.
He was there, he was standing there, matter of fact, when Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald. Phil Jones was a guy who worked for WCCO and he went to CBS. And he put in a word for me when he was at CBS that they should take a look at me and as a possible hire. And it was through that connection and John Lane, who was been the bureau chief in Chicago, who helped me get the job in Minneapolis. He was then working as a producer for Walter Cronkite. And so he put in a word for me too. And so I was hired by CBS in 1974 to be a correspondent. And I went to New York. I spent about 9 months there, trying to do everything I possibly could just to get everybody familiar with what I could do, what I couldn't do. An opening came up for a job as a correspondent in Bonn, West Germany. One of my dreams was always to be a foreign correspondent. I really wanted to see the world. I'd been a geography junkie when I was a kid in school. So I got that job, and I was based in Bonn for 3.5 years, but for most of that time, the Middle East was really cooking up. Vietnam was winding down, and the Lebanese Civil War was going on. So we spent a lot of time in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt. We did a lot of European stories. I think when I was based in Bonn, the farthest north we went was the Arctic Circle to do a story, and as far south as South Africa, when Henry Kissinger was working that part of the world to try and convince black majority countries to have black majority rule. And we went there on a number of occasions when Kissinger was in that area. After 3.5 years there, then I always wanted to work in London, and I got that chance. And we moved to London. I was there for 2 years. Most of those 2 years, or a good part of that 2 years, was spent in Iran. The revolution was cooking.
Yeah.
And you'd go in there for a month at a time, you'd come back out for a couple of weeks, and you'd go back for another month. And eventually it led to the Iranian Revolution. And my last stint there was, usually you were supposed to be on an assignment like that for a month. And I was there for almost 2 months. And I left the day before the Ayatollah flew in from Paris, and then everything went haywire.
Yeah.
I had always wanted to cover a presidential campaign, and I wanted to come back to the States also because mostly everything we were doing overseas at that time was covering wars, revolutions, uprisings, dangerous conditions. And I had seen a lot of combat on the Israeli-Lebanese border, lots of shooting going on in Lebanon, and I'd gotten my fill of it. And I wanted to come back, and I wanted to go on a presidential campaign. So in 1980, about 79 actually, when campaigns were starting to roll, I was assigned to the John Anderson presidential campaign. And when they announced who was covering what, we were a lot of us were gathered in Des Moines, Iowa, where the Pope had come to Des Moines for a number of appearances in the Iowa area there. And we were all meeting in this big room after we had fed our stories to the Cronkite News that night, and it was announced who was covering what. And Bill Plant was assigned to Ronald Reagan. There was a fellow named Lem Tucker. He was assigned to Howard Baker's campaign, and somebody else was, I can't remember who was assigned to the Bush campaign. I think Diane Sawyer was assigned to the Bush campaign. And then when they announced that I was assigned to the John Anderson campaign, everybody laughed because they thought that thing's going to go away in about 5 minutes. Well, everybody fell by the wayside except Reagan and Anderson on the Republican side. And Anderson decided to become an independent. And so that campaign just kept going and going and going. But then Anderson was going to have to choose a running mate, and the guy he chose was a distant relative of mine named Pat Lucy, who was a former governor of Wisconsin, but then was appointed the U.S. ambassador to Mexico. And Lucy was kind of fed up with the Democrats at the time. Jimmy Carter was the candidate, and although Carter had appointed Lucy the ambassador to Mexico, Lucy didn't have much respect for him or who the ticket was going to be against Reagan. Didn't think they had much of a choice. So he decided that he would go along with Anderson, and at that moment I said, I got to get off this campaign because there can't be any conflict or anything, because my dad and Pat Lucy had been in the grocery business together when they were in their early 20s in a small town in Wisconsin. My dad had given money to Lucy. So anyway, I was based in Chicago at that time. I'd been in Chicago for about 5 years and covering mostly stories in the Midwest. Then there was a possibility they were going to open a bureau in Denver. I always loved that part of the country. That would be my dream job, and I got it. And we opened a bureau in Denver, and I was there for 11 years doing stories around the Rocky Mountain West, and we basically covered an area from Montana, Canada on the north, all the way to the Mexican border. And we also did a lot of stories in California when people would be away or on vacation or whatever. I'd get shipped over there to help out. After 10 or 11 years in Denver, they decided that money was getting tight and they were going to start closing bureaus, and they closed a lot of them, and one of them was Denver. So I was transferred down to Dallas, and I was always enthralled by Texas, because I just thought that, God, if you're going to have news stories, have them in Texas, because everything that happens in Texas is 10 or 20 times bigger than anything that ever happened. It's not just, sadly, a mother taking the life of her one child. It's a mother taking the life of 5 of her kids.
Yeah.
Or the tornadoes are huge, or the hurricanes are just gigantic. And everything is bigger than life in Texas. So I really like Texas a lot. I've always been fond of that state, and I always liked the people there. And then after 10 years, and I turned 61, I had thought about retiring when I was 55. And in the last few years that I was with CBS, things got really tight. The money got really tight. There was more competition then. When I started with CBS, Walter Cronkite was doing the news. There were only 3 or 4 channels at the most, and 37 million people watched Walter Cronkite every night in those days. Now CBS would be lucky to have 2 or 3 million people watch the CBS Evening News. It was just a completely different situation, all mostly by economics. In the old days of Cronkite, money was no object. In the last years I was with CBS, if you're going to Denver to do a story, have 2 or 3 other ones that you can do when you're there. It's got to be a 2-fer or a 3-fer, because everything's too expensive. When you walked out the door on a story that was out of state, it was a minimum of $5,000 to do that story. If you were lucky, it was $5,000. So it all became economics. And I think the biggest change that I've seen, aside from technology, which is just, it's completely different than when I was there, and that's only 8 years. Now everything is all digital and everything. There are no videotapes anymore. It's little bitty cameras like that thing. And that little camera is just as good as those great big things they carry around on their shoulders that cost $100,000.
And it holds 20 hours. So.
Sure. Aside from the technology, it's the money. As I said, there were only 3 or 4 channels when I started with CBS, and now there's 300-400 of them. There's so many more different news organizations all competing for the same thing, and it's all about money. It's why Fox has become what Fox has become, because they cater to a conservative audience, and they've made a fortune with that. It's why MSNBC has now gone to the left, because they think that because of Fox over on the right has made such a barrel of money that if they cater to the left, they're going to do well, but they're not doing that well. Some may argue with me, but I think CNN is pretty much down the middle, and they're going down the drain. They're having real problems. So that in a nutshell is probably the biggest change that I've seen over the years, and I think we see more division in this country because of how everything is separating, and we're choosing sides, and we don't like you people, and we don't like you people, and it's become very discouraging. Everybody's after an opinion now. You see very little fact-based stories. I still watch this NBC Nightly News because I can see it at 5:30, and then I watch the CBS Evening News. It comes on at 6 o'clock. And to me, maybe it's because of when I grew up and where I grew up, and where at the time when I worked, I still regard those as my main sources of television news. I still read the 2 papers every day. We get the New York Times, and we get the Phoenix paper. And our son, Michael, is a photographer for the Arizona Republic. He shoots mostly food. He wanted to be a photographer for Sports Illustrated when he got out of college. He did work for a magazine called The Sporting News out of St. Louis, but he wanted to move here, and he got a job with the Republic. He did shoot sports, he did shoot news and things like that, but when this job opened up in the features department shooting food, he took that. But he has just resigned from the Republic, and he's going to work for the Salt River Project because, number one, because they have great benefits, he can make more money, and it's job security. Because at the paper, you don't know if your job's going to be there tomorrow. Do you have a question?
Yeah, what's the definition of a correspondent? Is it kind of like being syndicated?
No, you're a reporter. You're a reporter. It's a big word for reporter.
And how do you get your stories? Do they tell you, or do you say, I want to cover such?
Well, in the old days, for the times that I worked in Chicago and Denver and Dallas early on, we came up with most of the ideas. We generated the ideas. But in the last 5 years that I was with CBS, they told us what to go on. If you came up with a story that you wanted to do, you had to find something else, to go along to make it worth their while. Otherwise, it was basically a hard news event. It was a school shooting, and I covered 5 of those.
Wow.
And those were the most depressing stories I'd ever been on.
That ducky's looking pretty good.
Pardon?
That ducky in the back of the bicycle's looking pretty good.
Yeah. I had a reputation at CBS that I could cover anything, no matter what it was, and get it on the air. So I got a lot of work, because if something was happening in the panhandle of Florida that one of our guys based in Miami, they didn't think he could do a very good job at, they could always send me, and they know that story would get on the air. That was my reputation. My reputation was as a writer, not so much as a performer. And I worked on that. I would sweat blood writing stories. And that helped. That helped me get on the air also.
Something that I've always wondered is that when you have a major event like the hurricane we just had, it seems like, within a very short time, all of a sudden there's 300 correspondents there. How do they all get there so quick?
You just go. You just go. When I worked in Minneapolis, we had big snowstorms up there. And the general manager came in one day and said to the news director, "Ron, how many of your people came to work today?" He said, "All of them." He said, the upstairs, the 5 floors upstairs, they're empty. People said they couldn't get to work today. Why is it that these news people, why can they get there? When things happen, you just go. I was in Dallas the day the Oklahoma City bombing occurred, and we were in the office, and the bureau chief got a call from the Oklahoma City affiliate saying, "You better get up here, it's bad." And we just chartered an airplane, and we had it within an hour, and 90 minutes later we were in Oklahoma City. There were like 6 of us. You go. You wear a pager. In those days, you wore a pager all the time, and you couldn't plan anything, personally.
Plan all you want, but.
Because you could be gone anytime.
So when you went to war zones, did you stay there?
Yes.
And did they give you extra pay for hazardous
No.
duty?
No, they wouldn't. In the early days in Lebanon, if you wanted a bulletproof vest, you had to buy it yourself.
Yeah.
Now, one of the reasons why they keep correspondents in Iraq and Afghanistan, but not so much anymore, is because news organizations have had to hire security companies
Right.
who drive bulletproof Chevrolet Suburbans. The security people will go out. You say you want to go across town to do a story. The security people will go there first and make sure that it's safe, and they'll pick the right route and whatever to go there to do the story, and then bring you back. But you're riding around in a bulletproof vehicle.
You really have to want to.
You have to watch it.
Really want to be there.
Yes. But there's a kid named Richard Engel, you've probably heard of with NBC.
Oh, yeah.
All right, he went over there, he was going to try and make a name for himself, and despite the dangers and all that, he would go there and he'd work it, and he made a name for himself, and that's his whole life. I saw a lot of guys come out of Vietnam who came back to the States, and they really couldn't do a story in the States because they just didn't have the imagination to be able to tell a good story. So it's, you can make a name for yourself. A lot of guys made names for themselves in the Vietnam War and came back to the States. Dan Rather made a name for himself over there. He made a name for himself at a hurricane when he was working for a station in Houston by tying himself to a tree. And of course, he pulled that stunt later on when you couldn't see these three guys who were holding his legs in some hurricane down in the Florida Panhandle or down on the Gulf Coast. But he stood there and rode out the wind.
Do you ever personally endanger yourself?
Sure,
Of course.
lots of times. But you know, when you're 27, 28 years old and you know you don't have any kids, you think you're bulletproof, and then after our son was born in London, then about 6 months later I was really wanting to come back because I saw the future over there, because it was going to be war after war after war after war, and that, you know, going around visiting castles and things like that. Those days of Charles Collingwood and Edward R. Murrow, and those are long gone. But, you know, is there a question?
Did you ever not get a job that you applied for?
Yeah. But, you know, I didn't get a job with NBC, and that was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me, that I didn't get that job.
And why was that?
I just don't think I would have liked working for them.
Was it too big, too corporate, too?
It was the kind of the culture of NBC, which I just didn't really like. I grew up sweeping out my dad's shop, listening to the radio in the evening with guys like Edward P. Morgan in the news, and there was a guy named Alex Dreyer, and there was somebody else, but you'd hear the news on the radio in the shop, and that was all CBS, and I grew up watching a CBS station in Cedar Rapids, WMT, and and Cronkite, when Cronkite was doing a show called The 20th Century, and then Cronkite would do the evening news, and from his background of being a guy who told you history with the 20th century, watching the news every night was like watching history.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And
Educated.
that was really why I really wanted to go to CBS.
And don't forget, he also did You Are There,
Yep,
too.
yep.
Seems to be a lot of discussion today about networks and their affiliates trying to make the news instead of report the news. Like, I haven't listened to Fox or watched Fox in 10 years at least.
I don't watch them either.
Who do you think does the best job network-wise of reporting the news? And you could maybe even name an affiliate too, if you could think of one, a local affiliate, but network especially.
Well, I don't think the affiliates here are really anything to brag about. I'm partial to Minneapolis because I worked there, and they still do a good job there. Denver, they do a pretty good job. You don't want to go to New York, and you don't want to go to LA. They're just terrible. My daughter was in Tampa for 3 years before she got a job in Minneapolis, and it was awful down there. As far as who does the best job, I don't know. I still am partial to CBS, NBC. I'll watch ABC occasionally. I probably, if I want to see something that's going on, a big event, like right now, I'd probably turn on CNN, because I know they're going to throw a ton of money at it, a lot of people, and, you know, give you the best idea of what's going on.
Yeah.
But the BBC seems to give us more information than any American company.
I don't like the BBC.
Why is that?
There's stuff that Americans wouldn't hear about any other way.
That's right.
Certainly a different slant.
That's
Yeah.
right. A BBC covers parts of the world that we really don't care about. They're everywhere. But I don't. I'm not sure. I'm not sure why. I just always thought the Brits were kind of arrogant anyway, and if I want to watch the news, I'm not going to watch Brits.
You don't have an opinion.
Don't.
Well, what is it about New York and Los Angeles that bother you? Are they just so caught up in their own sense of self-importance?
It's all show business,
Oh,
and it's real
okay.
shallow. You don't see anything in depth. You don't see anything more than 60 seconds or a minute 15. In Minneapolis, you'd see a story for 2 or 3 minutes. They'll tell you pretty much what's going on.
You said something really important, a sense of history.
Yeah.
And that's
Yep.
a lot.
Charles Kuralt, when I first went to CBS, they said, when I first interviewed there, they said, who do you like here? I said, well, I want to be the next Charles Kuralt. They said, come on upstairs, we'll have you meet him. So we went up there and we, shook hands and we talked for a little bit. I said, what do you like about this business? And he said, it's a front row seat to the greatest show on earth, the human race. And that always stuck with me. Because, it's like, why are they always rushing off? They're the first ones there, It's because they want a front row seat. They want to see it unfolding.
Well, they're kind of like the same people running up the stairs at the Twin Towers, so.
Yeah, I don't think they're that brave.
What exactly is meant by when they say that a reporter is embedded with a certain group of...
Yeah, I don't like that.
And do you think that influences their...
Yes. When it was announced that we were going to have embedded reporters in the Gulf conflict, I thought, boy, this is cheerleading.
But what does that mean?
It means that they're part of that unit.
And why is that a bad thing, or you're not?
Because they become cheerleaders. They get all caught up in what's going on, and they don't look at it critically or.
So they need to stand back a little more?
Yeah. See, the Vietnam War taught the military and the administrations a lesson. Don't let these people come out there and do this on their own. You got to keep a watch on them. We got to keep a lid on them. We got to lead them around. We can't let them don't let them go off and just do something like that.
What, the reporters?
Yeah.
Because
Because they might find out what's really going on.
Yeah.
And there was, we had a guy, Bob Simon, when Saddam invaded Kuwait during the first Bush administration. They had this embedded kind of thing, not as big as when we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq. But Simon didn't want somebody minding him, and so he and a crew went off by themselves, and they were captured by the Iraqis.
Oh my God.
And he was held captive in Baghdad for, I think he was there for about 3 months.
Is he the same Bob Simon that's on NPR now?
No, Bob Simon's on 60 Minutes now.
Okay.
But I would say, the advancement of technology these days, and the fate of like hard copy newspaper and magazines seem to be disappearing. Because now a story gets overexposed through the internet, and quicker than it can get on the camera, or quicker than it can get on the thing. What do you see happening to the current news and/or newspapers with the advancement of technology? Are they going to fade away? They're going to redirect how they report, or?
Newspapers?
Yeah.
I think newspapers are probably going to fade away. I hate to see that. I still like to hold a newspaper in my hand.
Yeah, I do too.
Well, what about news reporting with how things could, news reporting, because things get so fast on the internet now, it's all up on, instead of the, on camera on the news? Does it make any sense? I mean,
Well,
and the news reporting had to do differently these days, or a different way?
yeah, it's a lot faster, and I think you got to be, usually when something happens right away, there was a book written called The First Casualty. The first casualty is truth. When it happens right away.
Right.
The nice thing about when I was in the business was you could collect it, you could sit down and you could write it, you could think about it, you could put it in in a form. Now it all comes out so raw. You gotta really be skeptical of the first thing you see.
So if you were teaching a journalism class of any sort, what would you, I mean, you've been telling us some of that, but what would you say to your class that the way it was then and how it is now? And you just said some of that is processing it so that you have maybe a more, thank you, yeah.
Yeah.
Like what do you miss the most about a little more depth or a lot more depth? Any depth?
What I miss the most is the pressure of the deadline. What was your question again?
Well, just basically, you're basically telling us you see a huge difference in the quality, even though we get it so quickly.
Right.
Then the quality is gone, and like you said, the truth and.
Well, it's like now anybody can do it.
Yeah.
And if you got it's like if you have a laptop and you got access to anything, you can tell your side of the story. You can tell your version of the story.
With YouTube and like social networking, you can get the story out yourself. You see with something, you can get it out too sweet.
Yeah, the thing about seeing things on the internet, I don't believe hardly anything I read anymore. You can't.
Anybody can send anything out as truth that
Sure.
you have.
Sure. Ma'am?
Bob, you have a monitor on there.
Yeah.
Have you got some stuff to show us?
Oh, yeah. You want to get to that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Kitty.
Yeah, I do. Get me off the hook. The first story I've got here is a woman who's maybe a little older than us and maybe our age. You'll always hear somebody say, "I don't care what people think." But we all do. But this woman was, I think, 83 years old at the time. She doesn't care what anybody thinks. She is from a town called Eskridge, Kansas. Her name is Maisie DeVore. This little town it's in a poor part of Kansas, outside Topeka. By poor, I mean the farmland is really not as productive.
Where I'm from.
Eskridge, Kansas?
I'm from Kansas, but not for that little town, but I always go back with my brother this month ago, and we went out and fed the horse and a couple of chickens.
Yeah. Well, this lady, she grew up in this town. She lived there most of her life. She always thought that the one thing the town needed was a swimming pool, but the town was too poor to build one. And she learned that if you pick up pop cans, beer cans, old scrap metal, things like that, you can recycle it and you can make money. So for 30 years, she picked up these pop cans and beer cans and things like that. She'd go out along the road and pick them up. And her kids would say, it was embarrassing, God, because somebody driving to town and say, I saw your mom out there on the highway picking up beer cans. But she was bound and determined to do it, and she was discovered by the actress Glenn Close, who told one of our producers about this woman, Amazing Maisie, they called her, in Eskridge, Kansas. And the woman said, well, how'd you ever run onto her? And she said, well, she answered an ad that we put into a paper for weathered farm-looking women to appear in a series called Sarah, Plain and Tall. You remember that? Well, Maisie was in like 3 episodes of this as an extra. Anyway, she told us about this woman, and I think I got it in there. So we went and did the story when they were just about to start building a swimming pool. Oh, I pushed the wrong one button. I looked her up on the internet this morning to see if she's still alive, and I believe she is. She's probably 93 or 94 years old now, and I'm sure she'll live a long time. She's really a tough gal.
Tin cans into liquid
This was on the Sunday morning show.
Easy. But it can be
Can you hear it okay?
The determined woman who Bob McNamara is about to introduce us.
Hi, Lisa. Oh, boy.
It was the biggest day of Maisie DeVore's life. The high school band and her little hometown of Eskridge, Kansas, honoring this 82-year-old's one-woman crusade. And even those who once called her Crazy Maisie were there to open the town's new swimming pool.
Are you ready to swim?
It was Maisie DeVore's 30-year-long dream.
Maisie hasn't seen this sign, so we'd like to show it to her right now. Maisie, it's right behind you, honey. It says Maisie's Community Swimming Pool, made possible by Maisie DeVore.
These are worth 30 years, day in, day out.
I know it could be done. It just took a lot longer, but it is.
It was the kids in Eskridge that inspired Maisie's drive for a pool.
This is all the Council Ball program. That's the only thing they've got for kids. And every kid isn't ball-minded. They don't want to play ball. But there's not very many that don't like to swim.
And so it began. The day Maisie DeVore discovered there was cash in aluminum cans, she launched her mission to start saving for a pool.
Nope. Firemen haven't had a meeting.
If she wasn't combing the town streets for cans,
Got it.
she and her rickety old pickup were scouring every back road in the county.
Oh boy. I'll have to get some new wiper.
Rain or shine.
As long as it runs, I'll keep driving.
Every trash bin was on her radar. And farmers like Peggy Miller gave her cans.
You can't keep her down. She's always doing something. Yeah, she's a woman that's, well, she's raised 4 kids, been through 2 husbands. So she's a hard-looking country woman. That's all there is to it. Yeah, I'm proud of her for doing it, because it hasn't been easy.
I caught my finger in there before I lost a fingernail, so I don't stick it in there too much.
Over the years, it wore her daughter Marilyn worried.
They just kept on, and Sunday she'll come here for lunch. You know, she's so exhausted she can hardly eat. And then, no, I gotta go, and we gotta mush more cans.
Did your kids ever try to discourage you from picking up cans?
Oh yeah, yeah. Marilyn was on me all the time.
What'd she say?
Mom, you're never going to get that swimming pool. You might just as well quit that. Yeah, they told me that. But I don't go down and tell them what to do.
For some people, it was sad, seeing a woman chasing what they saw as a hopeless dream.
They've always made fun of me at Eskridge, but I really don't care. Doesn't make that much difference to me.
I can remember when Rod and I first started dating, that was probably about 10 or 11 years ago, and he had told me about his grandma.
Ladine Allen married Maisie's grandson and was as skeptical as everybody else.
Love you, Grandma, bye. Bye. I never came right out and told her I thought she was nuts. But I said, you know, Maisie, are you gonna be okay with this if it doesn't happen? It's gonna happen, it's gonna happen.
There's nobody home.
It must have gotten discouraging.
It is.
10, 15
Oh, I don't
years
know.
ago.
I'm not a person that gets downbeat very often. You can let anything get you down if you want to. I think it's just your own attitude. If you think you can do it, usually one way or another you can get it done. And if you think you can't do it, you won't do it.
Are you stubborn?
I guess, but I wouldn't have got this far. I never had things easy when I was a kid, and I guess if I set my mind on something, I'll just keep plugging away till I get it done.
If you look at Maisie's pool fund bank account records over the last 3 decades, you get an idea of how can by can, the nickels and dimes and dollars at a time added up to more than 6 million cans collected, 90 tons worth, and put more than $83,000 in the bank. And on the day she wasn't collecting or shipping another load to the recycling center, Maisie crocheted afghans and made quilts to raffle off.
But all this pile here is extruded aluminum. That's the highest price.
She collected and sold scrap metal.
And that's aluminum. This one's copper.
Or she poked through the bushes, picking wild berries to sell as homemade jams and jellies to grow the pool fund even bigger.
Every $100 helps. 10 of those and you got 1,000.
Wow. You've had a busy week.
After raising a total of $100,000, and the state of Kansas added a $73,000 grant, the pool's construction finally began before Maisie's eyes, just across the street from her own home.
Oh, so you're starting the tile.
Her dream was coming to life.
I just really couldn't comprehend that it actually was going to come to pass. Even though you thought it was, it still gives you a funny feeling. I've got a long ways to go, but all the way around that.
People call her Amazing Maisie, and there's a real truth to it. For 30 years, she kept her dream alive, and she not only kept the dream alive, she kept her heart and her tenderness and her love for people alive.
Ladine Allen.
I'm glad that everybody did finally come around and support her. But I think when we can get her over to that pool and get her in that pool, that's going to be a big thing for her family and the rest of us. Well, I really am so happy. Is it okay for the kids to come in? It feels good. It feels good.
What do you suppose the most satisfaction is that you've gotten out of this?
Well, I think the most satisfaction is I'll get to watch kids swim, have fun. They said the noise will bother you. I said the noise won't bother me one bit. I don't care how much they holler.
Laura Bush saw the story, and when she was the First Lady, and they gave Maisie the National Volunteer of the Year award. Took her to Washington, wined her and dined her, you know, had a big night. And Mrs. Ray Kroc, the wife of the founder of McDonald's, sent her a check for $50,000 and said, use this on yourself. Well, she put it into the pool. The thing was, this town is so poverty-stricken, if I can use that word, those two words, that Maisie still, for a couple of years, was still crushing cans to help pay for the lifeguards and the upkeep, you know, of all that for the pool because the town just couldn't afford it.
Huh.
And She was probably one of the most inspiring people I ever met. And the other one is I gotta play through this first story because I don't have the technological expertise to be able to go right to it. Because when I retired, I knew I was going to be leaving CBS in a week, and so they really kind of gave me the week to gather all these stories that I had done over the years and put them in some form that I could have them. And it was kind of a crude way to do things, but I got them. At least I saved them. The first story is it was a story that we did up in Aspen, Colorado, and you just kind of bear through this because it's one of those things you do and you forget about, and life goes on. But I'll play this. It's about, they had a vote on whether you could wear fur in Aspen, and we'll watch this one, and then we'll get to the real. Probably the best story I think I've ever done. My favorite.
It was Aspen's heaviest voter turnout ever. More than 70% of the Glitter Colony's 3,700 voters casting ballots.
We usually have 60, 65% turnout. Aspenites get very involved in their election.
But this time, it was the fur issue that had so many at the polls. Whether to be the first in the nation to ban fur sales inside city limits. The ban and crusade of Aspen's Mayor Bill Sterling, accused by many of publicity hounding.
How can you be an animal lover and allow 100 million sentient wild animals to be trapped and killed or farmed and killed every year?
But in a town where letting the rich act rich, and where those who don't go skiing go shopping, banning fur sales was a Mickey Mouse issue for some. And last night, even before the city clerk's staff counted all the votes, those favoring fur claimed victory for freedom of choice.
Welcome back to Aspen. And regardless of what you're wearing when you come to Aspen, whether it's a fur coat or whatever else, you're certainly welcome here.
Despite an exit poll saying over 70% of those against the fur ban wouldn't buy a fur, Aspen's mayor and his wife, who organized the anti-fur campaign, had known theirs was a lost cause even before voting.
Notice how they look alike?
Yes, we're going to continue to raise people's awareness about this issue.
But first, another election faces Bill Sterling in a month to save his own political skin in a recall. It used to be polls here had something to do with skiing. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Aspen, Colorado.
So what happened? Did they vote to keep it?
I don't remember. I don't care. It's been so long ago. Do you remember Earth Day?
Yeah.
Remember that when that happened a long time ago? 10 years after Earth Day, they came to us and said, we want to do a 10th anniversary piece on Earth Day. So nobody really remembers it, and it just, what's happened? So we thought, oh, geez, how do we do this? You know? We had a girl working in the office, and Julie Gautier was her name, and she was really an excellent researcher, and she could get on what's called Nexus Lexis, which is a service that goes over newspapers for years and years and on any subject. And she came up with a guy in a little town in North Carolina who had brought the bluebirds back to North Carolina after they had seemingly disappeared. And he was a wonderful guy. He was a guy who owned a nursery. And we went there, we did the story, and the condition was that we could do the story. We couldn't say where he lived. We just had to kind of sign off without really giving the name of the town. But then in the end he said, well, I guess you can use it. But I don't want people calling me, and I really don't want to be bothered, you know, and we said okay. But he was willing enough to do this story, and this is probably one that I'm probably most proud of. I've won 5 Emmys, and I've got an Overseas Press Club award over the years, and it's none of the stories I won Emmys for. There may be 1 or 2 that I'm rather proud of, but you win Emmys based usually on spot news events where you have to go and you crash these things, and once they're done, you kind of forget about them, and then all of a sudden they're submitted for Emmys, and holy cow, I got one. I didn't get anything for this one, just the satisfaction that I got to meet this guy, and he'll be with me forever. I'll never forget this guy.
The birds of Bailey, North Carolina, the warblers, the robins, the wrens. But none as sacred to this place as this one, the bluebird.
You get hooked on it. You just can't get it. And on a rainy day, a bluebird's bird.
In the last 3 years, we've almost had a bluebird explosion.
But in the pines of the sleepy tobacco town, it wasn't always that way. For decades, a bluebird was seldom seen here, until something dawned on one man.
The sound of the bluebird, it's the beauty of the song. There's no other bird that has a beautiful melody that the bluebird has.
For 18 years now, saving the bluebird has been the mission of a man named Finch, Jack Finch, the founder of the nonprofit Homes for Bluebirds, the makers of tens of thousands of bluebird houses, nests that have brought the birds back to the Carolina countryside, to the towns of Kentucky, Tennessee, and far beyond.
In this day and time, we're so busy living that we don't take time for these little things in life, which are very beneficial to help us keep us out of the bug out.
Today, with the morning mail and by phone.
Hello?
The calls for bluebird boxes come most every day. Desma Perry, now close to building her 20,000th birdhouse, a job she took 5 years ago, thinking she'd be out of work in weeks.
I thought we would, but I don't know. The more we do, the more they won't.
Let's all go out here to the yard.
Now, like pilgrims, come tour groups to Jack Finch's place. Nesting time, the best show in town.
You just get a feeling of elation when you see those eggs.
Oh, aren't they pretty? Look at what he did.
It was here deep in tobacco land that Jack Finch discovered tobacco barns killed millions of bluebirds. The smokestacks, outdated now, lured the birds to their death.
We must have got close to 2.5 million bluebirds when we didn't have any bluebirds at all. We just wiped them out completely.
A licensed bluebird lover, Jack Finch, 73 years old, claims no credit for restoring the bluebird, makes no profit for his work. His satisfaction is seeing another generation come to life, another visitor converted to his cause.
We have bluebirds in Michigan, yes. We have more now that I've got to.
What do you have to have credit for when you know it yourself? It's kind of like having something good and you want to share it with somebody else. I'd have to think 100 years from now, 1,000, that bluebird out there will come down my grave and pick up a bird.
Oh.
So, I'm not here, but the bluebirds will be here.
The bluebird carries the sky on his back, row for row, and one man's devotion keeps them on earth. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Bailey, North Carolina.
Very nice.
He's pretty good.
Bob, I'd really like to thank you for being with us this morning. This has been a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We could probably sit here for another couple hours. We do have lunch here available. I hope you'll stay and eat with us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Before we get up, maybe Pastor would bless him. I gotcha.
What, lay people can't pray?
Yes, we can. Get the big bucks for.
All right. I love to pray. Let's pray together. Holy and loving God, God of the birds and God of the fields, God who created all things good, we give you thanks for the ways in which the world is one, how all things work in harmony if we would allow them to. We thank you that you have brought us together to share in this time of learning and growing. We thank you for the long heritage of journalism that is represented in this presentation. We pray that you would bless us as a people, that we may be faithful, that we may be loving. We pray that you would bless our time together even as we break bread around these tables. For you have brought this food to us out of your goodness. We thank you for the many hands through whom this food has passed, that it may come to us. For all that you have done, we give you thanks in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Just a minute.